Hey everyone, friend of the podcast, Carl Bonner is a mixing engineer who helps other producers and mixers find, attract, and build better relationships with clients who are making the kind of music you are most passionate about. He recently began developing a course based on how he trains the Spotify algorithm to make super accurate recommendations for you to find potential artists to work with. And he's giving it all away for free while it's still a work in progress. So go to carlbonner.com/coaching to learn more, and I'll have a link for that in the show notes. So go check it out. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 128 with Matt Rifino. I had a great chat with Matt and we talked about so many things, including mixing from a young age, working at Avatar Studios, working for the Today Show on NBC. We talked about what it takes to mix for live TV and making sure your mix translates on consumer devices. We talked about motivation, overcoming burnout, quitting drinking, becoming friends with the artists you work with, thinking about the future, and goal planning. We also talked about mixing for the artist and not just for yourself, and prioritizing career stuff even when you're young. And we talked about listening and being a lifelong student. So tons of great takeaways here. I think you're going to love this episode. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Matt Rifino here on Secret Sonics. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Matt Rifino. Matt is a mixing engineer based out of New Jersey with 25 years of experience. Matt has won 5 Emmy Awards as the music mixer for the NBC Today Show, where he has worked for the past 15 years, mixing for a massively wide array of legendary artists. Matt credits his experience in live television for his ability to work at a very fast pace while still getting studio-quality results. Having the pressure of mixing live to millions of viewers every day has taught him the time management skills required to deliver a great mix in any situation. After a few years away from the record-making business to focus on television, in the spring of 2020, Matt completed his personal mix room, Stonehouse Studios, and began taking on studio projects as well as live performance remix projects. In that short time, he has had the pleasure of mixing projects for Spafford, Eggy, Connor, Bracken, and the Mother Leeds Band, who we'll hear, I guess, more about in the Sauce segment, Rebel Kicks, Frankie Perez, Sun Title, the Coltsies, just to name a few. Matt and I connected on Instagram recently, and I remembered his name from Working Class Audio from an episode that I didn't even listen to, but I will soon. And I invited him to join me on the show, which he graciously agreed to do so. With all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Matt.
Thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it, Ben.
Yes, absolutely. So tell the audience a little bit about your story. You know, when did music become a thing for you? How did that evolve into production, recording, mixing, the whole thing that you do?
Music started at a young age for me. About 5 or so, I got an acoustic guitar and, eventually learned a couple of chords. And then my dad let me get an electric guitar and I was like 9 and that was it. As soon as I got that electric, I was going. And around 12, I got a 4-track. So at that point, I'm like in my bedroom overdubbing, figuring out, plugging in guitar pedals direct. And, I had like one mic and just trying to learn all that sort of stuff. So then by the time I was like 13 or 14 and starting to play in bands, like from the first rehearsal, I was already recording because I had already been doing it before I even like played in a band. So from day one, it was like, how do I make this sound better? And through time, the setup got a little more elaborate and I figured out bouncing and from, if you go from 4-track to 8-track. And by high school, I was working in the studio. So it was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pretty quick. I knew this was what I was going to do within a few years.
Wow. How did you get your first gig at a studio?
Well, back in the 90s, there was like local access television on cable and they'd have these like cheesy local shows, it was like videotape stuff. And I turned it on one day and they were in a recording studio. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then they had like the cheap graphics go across and it says, that they're right in the town next to me. So I just kind of went over there one day and knocked on the door and said, hey, I want to come in and learn recording. They did guitar lessons and stuff too, as well as recording. It was a small little place. So they said, well, we do guitar lessons and stuff. And I said, well, I'll do those. I want guitar lessons, but I really want recording lessons. So could we do that too, like come in for an hour? And kind of started there. And within a couple of months, I was there like every day mixing little 16-track analog, all the DBX compressors and Alesis reverbs, all the lower end stuff of the 90s. But my grandmother would drop me off after school, and I would just, like, while they were doing lessons before the evening sessions or whatever, I would just mix for 2 or 3 hours, figuring out the patch bay, lining the tape machine, and just practice mixing. And that's, I think, how I got into mixing more than recording, even just from early on.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people that get started, at the very beginning, they're even more interested in mixing than recording. And it's interesting because it's kind of like a backwards approach. It's like, oh, let's just tweak whatever I recorded until it sounds cool or whatever. And people kind of forget about actually recording and understanding how, sources sound before they get mixed or whatever. I feel like that's something that I definitely had a moment there where I was just making really shitty recordings and then just trying to mix it and spending too much time mixing it without getting good recordings at the beginning.
Yeah, I don't think you realize, I started to get better with that. But yeah, for a while you try to fix everything that you do wrong instead of get at the source. But, luckily, and I think that this is kind of like one of the problems now with having DAWs, as you have everything where I started on a 4-track. So it had high EQ, low EQ. And then I got a little Samson submixer. So then I could submix my drums. Like I could put 4 or 5 mics up on the drums and pan everything to the left and take the left output and go to track 1 of the 4-track. But I had to get the drums sounding right there to go to, because you had 1 track of drums. So you learned I think you figured out a little bit more eventually about how to get it right at the source. Now you just throw a plugin on there or amp modeler or, it's just different. I'm glad that I got to learn that way.
You were limited by the tools, and sometimes being limited is great,
Yeah, like I didn't have a reverb. So I had this cheap Digitech guitar processor from like the 90s, the, digital foot pedal thing. So that was my reverb unit. So when I record drums, if I wanted reverb on the snare, I'd run it through the guitar thing and then track it, right with the reverb on there.
I love it. It's like a janky, like DIY analog, ish upbringing. I guess.
It was in that period of time, where most local studios were still 16-track, that were affordable for us. So if you had a 4 or 8-track that was really cool, and like ADATs were just coming out, so that was happening. But it was still very limited, there was no fancy gear really even being sold anywhere like there is now,
Yeah. It was a different era.
Yeah.
You got in at the end of that kind of...
Yeah, I caught the tail end of it.
Before the DAWs took over everything.
Yeah, I didn't even use one until like 98 or 99. So I had been doing it for 7 or 8 years before I even touched a computer screen, and saw all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it was Paris. Paris was the first system I learned on, which Ensoniq made like 1 million years ago.
Oh my God. I don't even know about Paris.
Yeah, it's pretty old school.
Was there a record that kind of blew your mind and made you really focus on, the audio side of things? Because I know you were like dabbling with it and stuff while you were playing guitar and stuff, but what turned you on to like good sound?
Yeah, I definitely remember like Appetite for Destruction, like just sounding huge. Like, and I remember trying to record in my basement, in my grandmother's basement, the kick and snare part for Paradise City. And I remember it was like the first time I tried separating kick and snare, and I was like, oh my God, there's no way. Like, it just sounds so good on this record. And I couldn't recreate that. And I always loved that record since I was a kid. But later on, that was one of the ones where I was just like, wow, that sounds really good. Like, I can't get to that. How do you get to that type of thing? And then I remember, and I didn't even listen to him. I just remember like the Bryan Adams record sounding really good when I was a kid. Like, I remember Faith No More in the car as a kid sounding really good. I don't know why. Like, certain weird records that I think of that maybe weren't even my favorite, but just to me sounded like, wow, this is another level. Motley Crue at the time, it sounded larger than life. Like, even in my mom's car, Tommy Lee's drums just sounded like this, like it was like unattainable. It was so huge. So those things. And then when the grunge stuff hit, obviously that was like my era. So that stuff seemed more attainable. I think that's why I got into it more, because like the Mudhoney drum sound seemed a lot easier to get than
the GNR sound.
The GNR sound, it was a different thing. Yeah. So then it was like, oh, well, maybe we can do this. And then I got into.
Now I think now people love the sounds of those grunge records, right? Like, the Nirvana drum sound.
Oh, I know. It was like so weird because I was such a GNR guy, and Nirvana came out like at that time, and I was like, I don't know which one I like more. This is so polished
Yeah.
and big, and this is so angry and teenage, which is what I am right now, you know? And it was like, I've always sort of been half a hippie and half a punk, I guess, you know? Like I'm always half into the Grateful Dead and half into the Sex Pistols. It's sort of, you know.
Nice.
I think now
it evens you out. That's a good.
Yeah, well, and
like
now especially I look at like the Grateful Dead and I think, man, they're more punk rock than any band that's on the radio now. You know, they're more raw and more real, and
that is true. That is true. Than any of that polished pop stuff.
I just think everything
stuff,
now
you know?
sounds so. It's like even like, you know, and they sound great. Everything sounds really good, but like even metal records, they're so produced now. It's not like raw the way they were.
The drums are very much
they
like
sound great, but it's like
chopped
kind of different. You know, it's cool. Just you know, not my thing.
It's like, yeah, well, the modern listener has gotten used to hearing everything in time and everything in tune, and so, you know, modern productions need to like live up to that hype, right? Like if you listen to, you know, Bob Dylan in the 60s, that stuff's not really in tune, but it feels so good, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all that stuff is up.
And the Dead is the same thing.
Yeah, the
Dead
band,
is the same thing.
you know, all that.
Love the band.
You know, all those records really speak in a really amazing way that,
right.
You know.
We did lose some of the emotional impact when everything became pitch perfect. I definitely would agree with that. And the problem is I have to tune vocals, right? Like,
we're all guilty of it, you know.
What are you going to do? You know, it's what's necessary now.
Yeah.
But maybe that'll change again. I don't know. Who knows?
I'm making it a point to not, you know, at this point in my life, I kind of work two different angles of it. You know, in the television side of me, I do a lot of pop and a lot of perfect sort of stuff. And in the record side of me, I try to focus on more natural type of stuff. You know, like no one's going to hire me to make beats for them or like totally tune and time and polish something. That's not sort of what, you know, what I focus on. But I have it in my other world, so I get to see sort of both sides of it, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool. It's also it's good to know what you want to say no to, and because that means you want to say hell yeah to the other stuff, right? Like,
yes.
Like if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no, or the other way around. And so it kind of gives you that kind of superpower of being like, this is the music I'm working on.
I'm very fortunate that right now I'm kind of able to do that. And it's really fun to get to, because on the TV side, I don't. It's just like, here's who's coming in today. Here's what I'm going to do. But the record side, I only pick and choose things that I really want to do. So if I'm not like super excited about doing it, I'm not going to be in the room, you know.
It's amazing. Yeah, because you have like a steady gig that helps cover your expenses. And so it's like when you have your other time, it's just like, let's go hard on what I want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been like a whole, it's been really great the last, you know, since I started off on this, just only getting to do stuff I want to do. It's so much fun.
Love it. That's great. Well, I want to ask you about how you got the job at NBC and what that job is like. But before we get there, I think there's a little bit more journey we need to cover.
Oh, sure.
We don't have to go too deep into the journey. But I know you worked at Avatar Studios for a bit. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Great. It was like one of the best times of my life. I mean, hands down. My grandfather was friends with Tony Bon Jovi, who designed Power Station, which became Avatar. So from a little kid, I was going to Power Station. So when I was
cool.
You know, a little like 10 years old, be going in and out of the power station, seeing records being made. And even before I really knew it's what I wanted to do, it just like music was always around in my family for so many reasons. And that was just another part of it. You know, we're going to the studio. And so when I started really doing this, like I always wanted to work at the power station. That's where I wanted to go. So after high school, I did a little bit of music school. I did like a year at Five Towns and studied jazz guitar and all that. And I wasn't cut out for it. There was dudes that were just blowing me away. And I just knew that end was not going to take, you know, I was better recording. So I went to SAE and did their first class they ever had in New York when they first opened. And right after that, as soon as I finished, like the next day, I called everyone I knew that was a family friend that knew Tony that could get me in. And Tony wasn't there anymore, but he made some calls and got me an interview with Tino, the manager. And I went in and Tino said, yeah, you know, we'd love to have you, but we don't have any space right now. And I said, okay. And I was going to other studios and pounding the pavement and doing that whole send 50 resumes out. And I was cleaning carpets just for the summer, trying to make money working for a friend. And